Right, really. Okay, this is Senate Appropriations, and we're continuing. We're kind of at the end of testimony on the FY 2024 budget request. Sorry to keep you waiting. We're a little late getting started. Needed to get a quorum. So we will have you present the Human Rights Commission's requested budget for FY 24, and we have your document here. Obviously, there's a lot more information than we will be able to cover as it relates to your budget. But why don't you sort of give us the highlights, and also what anything over and above the governors that might have been requested. I'm not sure what the House did or did not do, so it would be helpful if you could address that as well. So I'm going to let you take it from here, and welcome, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Bor Yang, Executive Director of the Vermont Human Rights Commission. And I think everybody in the room is familiar with the work of the Human Rights Commission. And I thank you all for all your years of supporting our office and the work that we do. I'm not going to spend sort of time introducing the HRC like I typically would in other committees where there might be new senators or representatives, and kind of just focused on the need and what the House has done. And I also have in your room today is Jason Pinard, who is our financial director from Financial Services Division, and Jason can answer any questions about the ups and downs for you. Every year, as you may or may not know, I ask for a full-time litigator because the Human Rights Commission doesn't have one. And it is pretty strange to have an enforcement entity and yet not have a full-time person dedicated to doing the work of litigation. This year, the House of Representatives has provided for one in the FY24 budget. So my ask of you today is to support that and allow that. The only thing that, so I've asked for $150,000 above the governor's recommended budget for that litigator position. The only thing that is a little bit strange is that, and I checked with the House today about it, is that when the budget bill was passed, they wrote staff attorney 2. And I would just ask that you remove the number 2 designation and just keep it as staff attorney. And that's because every state agency and department kind of decides what different levels of staff attorneys do. The role of a staff attorney 2 at the Human Rights Commission wouldn't do litigation. And the point of this role was to do litigation. And I think that was just a mistake of the Joint Fiscal Office. And so I checked with Representative Carrie Dolan on that, who handles our budget on the House side. And she said that was just a minor mistake, that if this committee supports adding a staff position to the Human Rights Commission, that you should correct that and remove the 2 that's in the budget bill and just have it staff attorney.
All right, thank you. We're tracking that right now as you speak.
Okay, thank you. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about the ask or about the Human Rights Commission in general and the work that we've been doing. But that is the my testimony.
Okay. Questions about the commission. If you just want to, I know you've kind of given us an update. We have a bit of time.
Okay.
Anything that you would like to sort of brief us on in terms of what the past year has been and sort of the what you see as kind of the work ahead? I see you've got, numbers don't tell the whole story, so to speak, and so here's a chance to sort of the budget doesn't necessarily tell the whole story for you as well.
Yeah. One of the questions that I'm frequently asked is how often do people file a complaint about this issue or that issue? And I think the reason why people ask that question is because they're curious as to the prevalence of discrimination. And I always say the numbers don't tell the real story because there's a lot of barriers to why people bring or don't bring claims of discrimination. For example, a person who's facing a housing crisis may also experience housing discrimination, but they're not likely to file a claim because they are looking for housing, or they're looking for schooling, or they're looking for other issues. And so there's a lot of reasons why the numbers might look the way that they do from year to year. Last year, the Vermont Human Rights Commission was short-staffed for a few years, and we stopped taking cases for several months, and our numbers were lower because of that, because we strategically decided not to take employment discrimination cases and places of public accommodations cases for a few months. We had a contract, or have a contract, with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and so we continue to take housing cases. And as you'll see that from our annual report, is that the housing cases continue to rise. So had we continued to take employment discrimination or places of public accommodation complaints, there's a good chance the numbers would look the same as they had in previous years, or be higher as well. We are probably litigating more cases than ever. And currently we're using a contract firm to do that litigation. A few years ago, I asked for a full-time litigator, and while the legislature was unable to deliver one, they provided a little bit of money that went into our litigation fund for the purposes of that. But that fund is dwindling down, and we need a full-time litigator to come in and handle some of that litigation. Why is it important for us to be able to have a full-time litigator or litigate cases? Is because previously, when the executive director was tasked with litigating, we often said no to cases, even though we had found discrimination, meaning we wouldn't file complaints of discrimination in court, even though the Human Rights Commission had done a full investigation and determined that discrimination had occurred because of the lack of resources. The problem with that is that many times our courts don't get to hear these cases. Our judges that have been appointed do not get to hear these cases. And so we're borrowing case law from the Second Circuit, New York City, Boston, other places, to help us interpret the way our statutes should be interpreted in Vermont, instead of having our own judges interpret how our laws should apply to the facts of Vermonters. And so that's why it's important to be able to bring these cases to court, to test these legal theories in court. And when we don't have a full-time litigator, we're really trying to just manage all of those things. The request for education continues. Previously, we could develop curriculum that we could really do over and over again. But there's been a real need and hunger in the state of Vermont for more specific and narrowly tailored curriculum. It used to be that we could do like a 4-hour implicit bias training for an employer or a business. But now they're saying, thank you for doing that, but we'd like you to consider looking at our policies. We'd like you to look at our hiring practices. We'd like you to take a look at the way that we evaluate staff, or the way that we provide services and goods to the public. And that is very specific, and it's not something you can create one time and deliver it to everybody. It's something that has to be narrowly tailored to each employer or business or agency, and that is very time consuming. We have on occasion said no to a lot of those because we're trying to manage investigations, litigation, managing the office, and all of those things. And so and that's why having a full-time litigator would be incredibly helpful, not just to litigate the cases, but so that we can take on more responsibilities that sometimes the legislature gives us as well, serving on task forces and committees, and also saying yes to all the requests for education and outreach.
Senator Starr has a question.
Yeah, for on page 11 of your handout, down at the bottom, it says 3 in red, staff attorneys. You have them already, or are those new ones that you want to add, or why is that in red?
Yeah, thank you. We currently have 3 staff attorney investigators, and I put that in red because I wanted to share with you that while we have an office of 6, it's only 3 individuals who are tasked with investigating all the claims of discrimination throughout the state of Vermont. I wanted to highlight how the very little amount of resources that are devoted to investigating these cases across the state. And in Vermont, we're investigating complaints of discrimination in housing, in state government employment, but also in places of public accommodations. And places of public accommodations in Vermont has a very broad definition. It includes schools, hospitals, government entities. In states like Rhode Island or Maine or New Hampshire, and even Minnesota, their places of public accommodation statute doesn't cover schools. It doesn't cover policing, police enforcement entities. It doesn't cover corrections. And so they may have 3, 4, or 6 staff attorney investigators handling their cases, but their jurisdiction is not as broad as the Human Rights Commission's. And so that was my only point in highlighting that in red, is to showcase how few staff we have devoted to investigating these cases. Thank you for that.
Right now, Bor, you've asked for the litigator. You do most of the litigation yourself then?
So previously the executive director was, and I am still doing some, but we have contracted some of that work out to a law firm to do.
I see.
Yeah.
And it's more cost effective to have a staff attorney, a litigator, than to the contract.
Yes, and it not only is it more cost effective, but it makes sense to have someone who is knowledgeable about the anti-discrimination laws intimately, and someone who works at the Human Rights Commission and has a demonstrated commitment to the mission of the Human Rights Commission. The other issue, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I understand it's not the governor's. My question is, in your current budget base, you're contracting and have an expenditure. And so when the House added the position, did they add the full cost, or did they net out the money that you were already spending on litigation, just doing it through a contract rather than having your own attorney?
I believe that in the budget bills that's passed by the House, that they've added that to our base budget, and it's not to the special litigation fund. So they are adding a full-time position with $150,000 being added to the base budget on an annual basis.
But out of your base, you've been paying a contract for litigation.
It's not out of our base. So when the Human Rights Commission was created, there was a special litigation fund on the side, and that is not out of our base, and that can only be used for litigation. Yeah.
And where is that fund?
Yeah.
That's called the special fund, and it's identified in the budget bill.
It's not in your commission then?
It's not part of the general fund. It's called the special miscellaneous fund.
Okay, they must speak excess receipts.
They
We need
do.
to do it.
Yeah,
All right.
they don't appropriate that fund.
Okay, that's all I'm asking. You understand why I'm just wondering. Thank you. We've got it squared away here. What I was wondering is if your base had the funding for contracts, and you're saying a staff attorney with litigator would service better than the contract, then are we talking about the need? Just cover, I hate to use the word delta. That's the new term, delta, and onboarding. And yes, but so, okay, thank you. I've got the answer.
Okay.
Any other questions for?
The only one I might have is the, out of the 3 attorneys that you have now, there isn't any way you could use one of them as your other attorney?
You mean to litigate rather than investigate?
Yeah.
Well, I guess the question is, do you have any excess staffing capacity with your with your investigators? And are they attorneys?
Not without saying no to investigations. I mean, the reality is we all wear all the hats because we have a staff of 6. So I have a director of policy, but I'm still doing policy. I have I'm still doing education as the executive director. All the staff attorneys are also required to do investigations and stuff. So if we were to switch one of those positions to a litigator, we would just be saying no to more investigations, which we don't want to do, because the goal is to investigate as many cases as possible, because that's where you're conciliating. And that's where you're trying to resolve cases before it goes to litigation. So you don't want to close the door to that path in order to facilitate more litigation, right? But we have tried that. We have tried going, can we make this position half investigator, half litigator? What happens is we don't want to say no to the investigations. And so if we don't want to shut the door to investigations, then we can't do that. And so I did try hiring one of the staff attorneys to be at least to facilitate and assist me with litigation. But the problem is they're so busy with investigations that they're unable to do that. So it's not doable.
Without an impact on the other
Right.
parts. Yeah. Okay, other questions? Thank you very much for being available on a Friday afternoon.
Of course, I'm working. Thank you all.
Yeah, we are too.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're gonna move on now to VHCD. Gus is here. And Holly's here. If you don't want to come up, you're welcome.
Sure.
Housing seems to have a lot of tension. That's not there. Come on.
I'll make you a call. So
I know that we have a packet here, and we will be talking about your budget proposal. I think it's going to lead into other housing proposals. We don't have a good fix on what the House did at the last minute on trailers and trailer parks, and that is a response, and obviously there's concern about the level of housing that's provided through motels. We have added it up, and it's over $200 million we paid to hotels or motels, and then what we're doing and how much ground that we're covering it as it relates to getting people into permanent housing. So, and I know that every year we hear fully fund the transfer of the property transfer tax to the HCB. We thought we made progress last year, but the governor's proposed budget replaced that base 10 million with one time, even though it got you to the same place. I believe the House put it back in. Once again, base funding is precious. So if you would like to speak to your budget, your request, your thoughts about how we can make, yesterday we had a testimony from the FHA, if I got the things right, Laura Collins, in terms of where do we, for our investments, what will help us close that gap between the housing need and what we have. And I know we've got competing priorities here, because we know that we have a lack of apartments for people who are not the lower income people that traditionally would benefit from your projects, or getting into mixed housing. So we're trying to figure out, first of all, let's start with your budget, but any thoughts you have in terms of where we proceed with housing. I will be honest, I've had a suggestion that we should look at Oregon and their model, I think, which is designed to take people from those motel, hotel living arrangements into permanent housing. I'm not sure what the model exactly was, or whether it's actually a model that we've been using that just hasn't closed the gap. So I'll turn it over to you with that.
So with that as an opening, the record has here the director of the Housing and Conservation Board, and Polly Major, who is our policy director, comes to us from Senator Leahy's staff, where she works on housing and human service and nutrition issues. She's been a Peace Corps and AmeriCorps volunteer and grew up working on her uncle's farm in southern Vermont, taking care of sheep and making a great sheep cheese. So she comes to us as someone who knows our whole package. I think I prepared a presentation that I think is going to get to most of the questions that you've asked, but I want to be as direct as I can in addressing the questions. So two things, and several of us have worked, including you, Madam Chair, in one capacity or another, going back more than 3 decades. And when I was a young person in community action, the best thing we could do for a low-income family is get them a Section 8 certificate, because that would stabilize their housing costs no matter what. And where we are today, and it took us 4 decades to get here, and I spoke to this when JFO invited me to give a presentation back in December, is that when the State Housing Authority issues somebody's Section 8 certificate, they have 6 months to find a place to live, and 4 out of 5 people are turning those certificates back in because they're unsuccessful.
Because of the HUD limit on the rental.
Yeah, and those have gone up, but because some landlords are just unwilling to accept them. So we have a shortage of supply in the state for people who are most in need of housing. As you heard from constituents and from employers, we have shortages at every level. And I guess I would say to you that the governor has pivoted in his priorities this year to what he calls the missing middle. I think the missing middle starts where tax credit housing ends, which is at 60% median, and really includes a lot of what I refer to as the essential workforce, those among us who have to show up for work, and I'll get to that in a moment in this presentation. I know you hate looking at pictures from your own districts. So the first picture is actually from Senator Maas's district and just goes to VHCD's mission. And this project opened this fall. It's 30 elderly units in South Hero. And what it did was help cement really the creation of the village center. So not only do people have views of the lake in some of those apartments, but they are a 3-minute walk from the community health center and a new library in South Hero. And that just speaks to the mission broadly that you have given us. We're asked to report every year on what we do, and what's different from prior years about the numbers here is that in typical years, even with a housing revenue bond, we were investing in about 300 to 400 units of housing. And over this time period, we're up over 1,200. So you have greatly magnified our ability to accelerate stuff. I think I reported that about 1,000 homes were either being started or to be finished in this fiscal year. And we're going to add to that at our May and June board meetings in terms of projects we're working on. This is our 35th anniversary, and we'll invite you to a celebration of that. But the impact of the program is that your constituents have taken the money you've given us and leveraged it about 5 to 1. And I know the governor has been big on the need for leverage. The more housing we do, the less federal resources there are to leverage. But this leverage has come from private investment, philanthropic support, increasing municipal support. These are all the housing programs we're running. The newest program is one for farm workers. We did a study about 3 years ago and found that lots of farmers did not have the financial capacity to improve their housing. So far that program has reached about 100 farm workers, and will more than double this coming year in terms of its reach. But we're hitting manufactured home communities. We do home ownership, which I'll describe in a moment, and the biggest part of our work is rental housing. And, and for those that are virtual climate, this is a replacement of an abandoned mobile home park in Waltham, Vermont.
From a few years ago, because we gave them a grant for.
We did, and functioning well as rental housing, but we replaced all the abandoned homes in the park, and these are net zero homes that with philanthropic help came out of a factory in White River Junction.
Net zero, Gus, does that mean that they're getting enough power off their
Yeah,
solar?
They're getting enough power off their solar so that they should have, and obviously downtowns and our community centers and economic revitalization is a big part of what we're doing. So this is the impact across the housing mission since the pandemic began, and we'll be adding to these numbers. But again, we are doing some home ownership. We're mostly doing rental housing. To the question you asked about hotels and housing, we in California, as the pandemic got going, were invited to a number of conferences. I think we created so far, well, we did our first conversion of an old inn in Waitsfield back in the 90s. And then we did Harbor Place and Beacon Apartments with the Champlain Housing Trust pre-pandemic. Since the pandemic, we've taken about 10 hotels and turned them into about 300 apartments. They're not all up and running yet, many of them are. So that is the advantage at the beginning of the pandemic is, and especially with suites, we could do it relatively quickly and it was less expensive than new construction, especially when there were already kitchens in the units. What we found at the beginning of the pandemic is we were doing that at an average cost of about $175,000 per apartment, way, way cheaper than new construction. When we got to the last one we did, it was closer to $300,000 per apartment, still way less expensive than new construction. So that is one model that we've used. We have actually put about 20 homes on vacant lots in mobile home parks around the state. That is one solution. There was no testimony that was taken. I got a call the morning that amendment was adopted. And the problem with that as a solution is, one, the math is wrong. We're not going to do it. You can't buy a new mobile home for $40,000 and you usually need to invest in site work. And second, when you're talking about housing people experiencing homelessness, there may be parks that have vacancies, but they may not be near public transit. They may not be near jobs. I know of 10 vacancies in a park outside of Springfield, but the water system is inadequate to fill those vacancies. So the water problem needs to get solved. So it's a great thought, and we're happy to do more of it. And we've actually encouraged several organizations we do business with, including the Housing Foundation and CBI, to bring us infill projects like that. And I expect there'll be more, but it's not going to be a massive 400 unit solution, I don't think. I think
It was an amendment to the budget or a
Yeah,
different
at the
bill?
last day it came in and it was an amendment to the budget. And it was taking 20 million from the money set aside for childcare because someone from ACCD had indicated that that was the number of vacancies in trailer parks all around. But the whole infrastructure for trailer parks has been a real concern, much because of the limitations or it's antiquated and needs upgrade. So it's not just a matter of their vacancies. Then you have to really evaluate why and how and location. And if you're dealing with families, like the whole issue around schools and disruption. So, but living in a hotel room or a motel room is exactly the most conducive to study and.
So if you ask me, is it possible we get another 50 or 100 homes on parks around the state that would serve some of the population you're concerned about, I would certainly say yes.
So what was the estimate on that? How many?
I think they had a number of like, they thought,
400.
let's do all the vacancies.
400? Oh,
You're saying it should be more like 100 to be a realistic.
I think 250 was the number they estimated at 40,000 per unit, which we see as realistic.
but as you've examined it and identified the challenges, it doesn't, it sounds like what your conclusion is, that that is a very workable response to address the housing gap as we're experiencing right now.
What I would say to you is there isn't going to be one solution. There's not going to be a silver bullet where we would have found it and done it somewhere in the United States for everyone.
I know, and I worry, Gus, that this bullet's heading for you. Because, well, seriously, you know, we've studied, we've done this, we've done that, and there's a desire that somehow we can, that there's an easy solution to something that has been such long-term. And it, you know, we had, when I was talking to Laura Collins, it was like, well, we can buy down interest rates. And it was like, well, but we had historic low interest rates prior. Why were we not seeing at that point in that fiscal environment more construction of homes to deal? So we're going to buy it down and somehow make it attractive today. But why would that work better now than it did prior to the pandemic, when we had such absolutely historic low financing rates? And I don't have the answer to that, but it does. And maybe it's because of the changes in S100. I don't know whether that's the major contributor. I know the profitability has been more on the high end. And so maybe that financing will work. And if you can help us, obviously the housing needs and the public hearing amounts that we got were huge, a couple hundreds of millions of dollars. We don't have that. And so we're here trying to figure out, with what we have, how do we allocate it in the most strategic way to get us, you know, the best return, and how do we, you know, as I've said, even on a temporary basis, are there other shelter options? Well, we put money into shelters and trying to grow that so that you've got alternatives to the motel rooms. So we're really trying to make sure that what we've got, and of course we spent money in the BAA, as you know, and the governor was not happy about that. But nevertheless, it was you got 27.5 in the BAA, and then we bought, you know, the home buyers. We did that 9 million. So we just are in the situation of how do we get the greatest progress here? And I don't expect you to solve it, and I don't think it's fair to expect that one entity is somehow that we should put this on your shoulders. On the other hand, I feel sorry for DCF. They were never in the business of building housing. I mean, that's not their mission. And so the housing shortage is, you know, they're supposed to come up with a plan, but unless they're going to have social workers turned into carpenters, I'm not sure that, you know, that they were, from an organizational and functional perspective, that's the right door to, you know, knock on, to say, you come up with a plan and somehow magically address where we are.
I wish I had, again, a magic bullet, a silver bullet that was going to solve this. I think that, you know, I've been in Senator Block's committee where he said this is all about permitting a couple of years ago. Permitting contributes to the problem. The high cost contributes to the problem. I was in a different committee in the other body talking about the cost of housing, and the rep from Newberry said, well, the reason you can't find anybody working at a reasonable price is because everyone in my part of the state is busy building a $6 million house from somebody who just moved into town. So we have a labor shortage that is driving cost. It has always been true, and I think you see this in the automobile market, there is much more profit to be made in an SUV than there is in a Ford Escort. And so car companies market and sell larger vehicles with more goodies on them because that's where the profit margin is. And this is a place where there is fundamentally a market failure that has been going on for many years, and we're not alone in this. This is true all across the country, that we have a shortage of housing supply. Very much true in rural communities, as I've talked to colleagues in New Hampshire, where people have come. Airbnb is one piece of it. Second homes are a part of it. So we're gonna have to attack this problem from many places. I would say to you, and this may belie my own political philosophy, that we're gonna have to have a conversation in future years as the one-time funds and surpluses and federal funds run out of what is in the public good. And this has been a particularly difficult week, I think, across the state for people who work in affordable housing. We have an AmeriCorps member who worked at the Groundworks Collaborative in Brattleboro and was actually supervised by Ms. Pritchard, and my staff had a relationship with her. So this is really hard work. And I would say this is 6 weeks ago, a former staff member of ours, 25-year vet who retired to become the director of the Good Samaritan Haven, and a staff member who survived but was stabbed just a few blocks from here. So I completely understand that, the work that Senator Ruth and Senator Sears have done on safety, the work that they're trying to do to support the mental health system is all wrapped up in this. But I think the discussion that Vermont is going to need to have is, given the housing shortage, are we willing to raise any revenue in the future to combat that shortage? You have been super supportive of our work, and for the 3,000 households that we have already touched with funds that have been appropriated, it makes a huge difference. And clearly, with 1,800 families still in motels, it hasn't been enough. And there are market forces at work that are just driving this. We're going to be in a joint meeting with Senator Lyons' committee, and Senator Robbins is talking about supportive housing next week. And this next slide just speaks to what we've been up to. So we added 50 beds of shelter in central Vermont this year, both in Berlin and in South Barry, and yet it is not enough. We tripled the capacity through the work of Champlain Housing Trust for the domestic violence organization in Chittenden County that now has 21 apartments instead of 7 in Colchester. Both of these are former hotels. We helped the Champlain Housing Trust buy the Ho-Hum as an isolation facility when people had COVID and needed a place to go to be away from their families or other people. And we're now converting that to 20 units of what's called permanent supportive housing, meaning all the households there will be people who experience homelessness, and there will be services and supports for them on site. CHT has done this a number of times, and working with the medical center has shown a reduction in healthcare costs over time once people are housed. And the facility in Brattleboro, in Bennington, that you see here is for families as transitional housing. This building was owned by the fire chief in town, and he waited a long time to be able to sell it. It just was occupied this month. So permanent supportive housing will be a piece of what we want to do. We've done that on several occasions. I'm told, fundamentally about a third of people experiencing homelessness have severe mental health needs. Other people simply need jobs, transportation, and some support. But if we don't strengthen the service system, if we don't provide more rental assistance, if we don't increase supply, and if we don't interfere in some way in the market, it's, as well as dealing with the work you did in S100, it's going to take all of that stuff together, and it isn't going to happen in 1 year or 3 years. I think we need to plan for a long march forward. It would be my answer. Even if you could say, we're going to up what the House did in the budget of $150 million to $300 million, we won't get it all solved quickly. The housing costs are rising at a rate that just keeps me up at night in terms of what it costs to build anything. This is just focusing on the issue of recovery. We will have about 57 beds come online this year, the first of which was in Barry for people recovering from substance abuse. I visited with Senator Sears and the director of Turning Point a few years ago. 2 of these facilities will be in Bennington, but there'll be 32 beds in Colchester, along with the Barry facility.
We have in testimony, there was a request for $1 million more for recovery housing. I'm not sure exactly
That might have,
where that recovery housing Remember, we got that, we needed 1.85 for base increase for the recovery centers and $1 million more for recovery housing. I'm just asking, it's not clear to me what that recovery housing they asked for. Is it more of the recovery housing that you've been doing?
It may have been on the service side of supporting those organizations like Turning Point and the Vermont Foundation.
To provide temporary housing?
I think it may have been to provide services for people.
It was, I don't know.
Well, I'll follow up and ask.
No, Soteria House, they want to buy the
Yeah, they
house.
want to buy the house, that's not.
No, that's a different one.
I do want to speak for a moment to what I think of as the missing middle, and that we are doing with home ownership. The building you see lower down is in downtown Winooski at the O'Brien Center. The city of Winooski, and we're seeing more municipalities step up, provided the land. There are 20 permanently affordable condominiums, fully occupied, brought in federal tax credit equity from out of state. I understand this was Habitat for Humanity Day at the State House. We built 168 homes with Habitat all over the state. There are 16 scheduled to either in construction now or get started in the next 6 or 8 months. So they are making a contribution pretty dramatically all over the state. And by statute, we can go up to 120% for median income for home ownership. Most of the homeowners we serve are at 80% and below. But all of the occupations you see here are covered by that program, and the family of 4 at 80% of median gets you up to about $75,000. So that's where we felt like it's been important to focus. Over the last couple of years, we've helped over 90 families into home ownership. Just about half of those homes came available from a home we subsidized years ago when the homeowner was ready to move on. So it took no public investment to get a new family into that home, while people do move on with some equity. I know you wanted to focus on housing today. As you know, conservation is a big part of our mission, and we've worked with Kingdom Trails. They've got another big project we are told that's headed to us. We discussed with Senator Starr and Senator Westman this farm that just turned over after a 20-year run when we first bought development rights with a new young couple that's going to do something a little different with it, but we provided an option to purchase at ag value to help them into ownership. So they ended up with, I think, about 158-acre farm, a nice house and some good ag buildings for a little over $400,000, which today is a deal.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of excitement in the ag world, and I brought to storytelling about all of these households because I know your time is limited today, but there are lots of young people who want to get into agriculture. But again, the farm in Fletcher was a dairy. We're out of dairying in 2006. Used to neighboring farmers, and this young couple just bought it in the last year or so as a diversified operation. If you haven't been to the market at the corner of 100B and Route 2, that's a young couple that got started on a farm in Barrytown with help from development rights and the liability program. And most of the farmers here use the liability program for business planning. And in terms of our budget, that's important because when we increase our base, we increase more than we're providing about $850,000 to support the liability program. We brought it up to $2 million so it could have more reach. You can see here how farmers are reporting to us their increasing confidence in a bunch of things that are important to their business skills, whether it's financial management, strategic planning, accessing capital. They're feeling like the program is making a difference for them as they do their planning. And we would not like to go backward as the governor's budget would have provided in this really important program for
What did the
rural
governor
areas.
do?
Well, by reducing our base from where
10
you got
million.
it last year,
I just want to make sure I
back
was
down.
connecting to.
we would not have the capacity to continue to support this program because his one-time funding is for housing only. So we're really appreciative of the action the House took. And the young couple picture here is actually farming in Berry City and grew up in the city, and we just helped them buy 34 acres with a development rights program. So market garden farming.
I have to cut in and just say, I totally appreciate what you do. And most of the people that you're doing this with, you're purchasing the development rights now. I will tell you, for me, it really is a crisis in where we purchase the development rights. The ag land now is at its base going for $3,500 an acre. And the people to buy that land that we already own the development rights on the farm, young farmers can't afford it. And I at some point, this is a new crowd, the ag committee is listening to me say this, but I'm watching no young farmer be able to buy the land that he already owned the development rights.
And I think we are finding that, and it is causing us to pause in any of the, I mean, you know how beautiful your valley is and what the real estate market is, not just for ag land, but for any real estate. We saw a farm we conserved in Stowe from the time we did the initial appraisal to the time that 15 months later, at the time that we were ready to close and NRCS feds required a new appraisal, the value of his development rights went up over $1 million.
Yeah.
So it is you're identifying a real problem that all I can say to you today is we're committed to trying to figure out a solution with you.
But
And I appreciate you raising.
just like that's a position of the appraisal of the development rights in a project we're putting together now, where we purchase the development rights to get it conserved in that. But the land that we've already conserved, when a starting price is $3,500 an acre, starting or higher now, I can think of a piece that just went for $4,000 an acre
For farm use.
for farm use. And in the current use program, we have.
It can't be a rocky hillside for that.
Right, it's not a rocky hillside, but the 35 acres right off of Route 15 in Jeff on the Well River, $4,000 an acre, and no one can farm for that and pay that mortgage, and it's being gobbled up by big conglomerates. It's not what I think we envision. At some level, for young people, we have to think about what's the next step to help.
I completely agree with you that, but I do want to offer two different.
Sorry, that's an off the.
It's an important issue.
I think I'm going home and slit my wrists this weekend because it seems like everything is 10 times more expensive. The need has never been greater. The demand for funding has never been greater.
You can't do that to us because you would cost us too much in the hospital.
That's what we struggle with is because every time we turn around, we have another request that we need more money because the need has never been greater. And it's sort of raising the question about how do we ever close the gap, because we think we're really doing a lot. We put millions in compared to what we've ever done historically, and we still feel like it's never been worse.
It's on the board.
Maybe we should make it, is it
So you won't switch your
unconstitutional to
rest this
hold the
afternoon. 18 to
assessed
1.
value at where it was when it was conserved?
All I know, well, I'm sure that they'll come up with something. I guess those of us who have been fortunate enough, because there used to be years ago, to live on a farm was really, it wasn't the.
Get to the barn.
Get to the barn. And, and so farm life was tough and it wasn't probably the most prestigious place to live, but all of a sudden we become quite.
Right, that's true.
So we're sort of priced out of our own well, I guess the main thing is to put it in trust and and move forward. But even with conservation rights sold, that now we're thinking that helps preserve affordability, but even that's being
Right.
driven up.
I-
But don't worry, we
I'll
need
take,
that. Huh?
I'll take part of the blame, but where we went wrong was 30 years ago when we set up the development right issue. We should have done that on a 25-year rotation.
So it would come back up and you'd have to reacquire.
Yes, and it would have made a smaller amount of money that you would have sold those for, but when you know, back when a lot of these guys sold the development rights, they modernized, or the dad and mom retired and had a little money. But now the money's all gone and the land value has gone down on development rights to sell them, because you've already sold them. I mean, some farmers, and it's only the big ones or rich people, will go in and buy the land of the development rights gone.
Mhm.
The little farmer, you know.
I guess I just need to say that I showed you a picture of a bunch of young farmers, most of them farming on smaller parcels that are figuring out how to make a living. And I do want to say, I had a conversation many years ago with Richard Hall of Fairmont Farms about why he wanted to get bigger. And he said, Mom and Dad had a great life on this farm. Bonnie and I need every other weekend off, and I need to be able to give my employees health care. And I can't do that farming the way they did. What he would also say to him is, and we help them buy 6 or 7 parcels, is they're not all under one easement. He said, right now it's part of a large farm. In the future, this 150 acres here may be a small farm again. You know, we don't know how the model's going to change. So I appreciate that in your part of the state, we have a bunch of large operators with a lot of capital. Prices are not that high every place. And I will work as hard as I can to help figure out what some of the solutions will be. To give you a tiny bit of good news, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I need some, please. Because generally all I hear is,
Whoa.
what?
Whoa.
Whoa, or can you help solve this problem or whatever?
This is the Rural Economic Development Initiative, again, initiated in your Ag Committee about 5 years ago. We've spent about $500,000 over those 5 years, and the return has been $10 million in successful grants. So again, a small farmer, the Sweet Rowan Farm, we helped them win an over $100,000 value-added producer grant. There's about 13 of those that the program has won. I believe the Northern Borders Regional Commission made a grant to help restore the bridge in Lindenville, which will be a picnic area and trails and that sort of thing. And as I move on to the next slide, that program also helped the Albany General Store and East Calais Store with those Northern Borders grants. And again, this just speaks to
Where's the one on the right? It's covered up on the bottom right.
a lot of,
Woodford or Waterford?
Woodford.
Woodford.
Prospect ski area.
that's Prospect Mountain Ski Area. It's about 10 minutes outside of downtown Bennington. And we helped a nonprofit buy it from the 30-year owners who retired. It is apparently the highest elevation of any of the cross-country places in the state. So it's got snow when lots of the rest don't, and is both great community asset, but also for people to be coming to Vermont. So all this work we do is about restoring small villages and helping them achieve more economic activity.
I know that Albany store, I mean, that wouldn't have happened without
What is in it now?
this help.
What's in it now? What's in the Albany store?
Oh, they got a little store,
A little
and you
store.
go and pick up,
They were without a store before this reopened.
it was closed, yeah.
Yeah.
I hope they got the plywood off the windows there in East
But
Calais.
that's so common
That one's
because
under construction, right?
Oh, okay.
It's not done yet. It's opening this summer.
You'll have to check it out.
Rough in my district.
More shelf
It's not in your
space on
It is
the
in-
inside.
Albany is?
No, the general store. We're talking about.
Albany's
Oh,
in
the East
his
Palace.
district.
Oh, yeah, East Palace is.
Now, Albany's in his
Oh,
district, as you well know.
oh, Sheila, what did you
Oh,
have, your
Look at
baby?
this.
Okay.
Oh,
Oh, it's just VHCD. We're just saying hi.
Like the.
Binky.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
Madam
well, you
Chair,
know, that's just, look, I was complaining about no joy and
Yeah,
whatever,
there you go.
and now
I'm here.
here
There you are.
it must have been
Highs and
channeling.
lows. Say highs and lows.
By and by.
Bye. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you very much. Oh, it's
So-
done.
more reason to be optimistic about the future right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure.
We have a large pipeline. We don't expect you to help us meet it, but I think the projects we do will have a catalytic, positive impact. And the three across the top, there is now finally a deal in place now that that fellow has left Burlington to fill the hole in downtown Burlington. And we'll participate in 85 of the 400 apartments that get built there. Tri-Park in Brattleboro, that red line represents not the floodplain, but the floodway, and there are 26 people who live in the floodway. And we hope that this is the year we're moving them out of harm's way. And the Clemens Farm is one of the few African-American owned farms in the state, and there was a story on public radio not long ago, but it is a cultural center for the arts, along with keeping the ag land in production. I'm not going to belabor the transfer tax, except to say that it's up,
Well, we're aware of that, yes.
and funding is available if you choose to. This sources and uses is a little different from the one in your budget packet, which is to say the one in the budget packet represents what the governor proposed. What the House did was to increase back to last year the base by $10 million and increase a one-time number from 10 to 50 million. So those are the two differences. And I guess I would just, knowing that we're just about at your time and that there may be more questions, we'll do as much good as you give us resources to do. I think every one of the 3,000 households that we've been able to assist over the pandemic, it makes, we talk about transformational impact, and sometimes that's about transformational impact when you fill a hole in the ground, or you take a slum and turn it into good housing and the rest of the neighborhood gets better. But for each of the people we assist, it makes a huge difference in the quality of their lives and the stability of their lives. And so I will despair all week and much longer about the life losses.
I know this has been,
But I would say that people are showing up every day to do really hard jobs and improve life for Vermonters. There will be, for the first time, a shelter in Hyde Park for people experiencing homelessness in Warren County. And that wouldn't have been possible without the support of this committee. So there is positive outcomes, though it doesn't yet reach.
so with the 2.5 that we said we want to put into emergency housing, could you just, you have thoughts about how that could be used? And that was really to help us think about what we put in place as alternatives to some of the rooms. I mean, there was a Vermont Digger did the article, and really, I've heard from some of the, and we've heard anecdotes where people won't even stay. They don't consider it safe or clean, or they'd rather live in their car than take some of the rooms. So, it sort of raises, are we in fact,
You have a nice car.
yeah, so do you have thoughts about how that could advance us on that front?
We have had since the pandemic began every 2-week meeting of what we call the Housing Recovery Working Group that includes us and VHFA and the State Housing Authority and the Agency of Human Services. Sarah Phillips has been the constant. I think she's been with us the last 3 years, and talk with them regularly about where's the most pressing need. the burnout for people is real. There's a group in Burlington called A New Place, that's a faith-based group, and we help them buy the old Champlain Inn, and they are finding it too hard for them to manage, and we're trying to figure out how to help them replace it. If I say to the Champlain Housing Trust, go find another food help and convert it to housing, they would do that. And I'm saying to Sarah, which of the groups that you work with who provide direct services to people experiencing homelessness is ready and willing to expand? I know that there's a need for more capacity in Wyndham, and I know those people are not ready to take on a new facility even before this week. But there will be somebody who will come forward, whether it's 15 or 20 beds or something, that will come forward in the next 6 months that will make that kind of investment in, as we just did with the folks up in Lamoille County. So that's my guess of how it'll land, but maybe somebody will give us a different creative idea. But I assume since you appropriated funds to us, you want a permanent estimate. You don't want it to just go into services or rental assistance.
Well, we're putting money in on the service side. I mean, we have
Right.
budget adjustments to support the teams that are supposed to be going out, and supportive housing. And we obviously, for our seniors, the SASH program has been a major
Absolutely.
source of support. So we recognize that for many of the populations, it's just not about housing. It's how to preserve that housing and give the support that's necessary. So we're trying to do it on both sides, but it's quite a uphill battle, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, the places where there is most interest to expand capacity right now, there's some discussion in central Vermont, in the Upper Valley, and there's beginning to be a discussion in the Northeast Kingdom about adding shelter capacity. So those are the three places that come most to mind, but until somebody brings me, here's the deal, I can't tell you where that'll land, other than somebody will add some additional beds somewhere. I'm confident of that. I'm confident when I'm back here next January that I'll tell you that here's where it's been placed.
It'll probably be one project that you point back.
Unless we do something like, if the Housing Foundation, which has 1,400, about 20 mobile homes, home parks, with 1,400 sites in them, if they come to us and say, well, we do have 15 vacant sites, we've already done 7 or 8 with them, and that could be another alternative. But again, for me, given the goals in appropriating those funds, it can't be a mobile home park anywhere. It's got to be one where there's public transit, where there are jobs and services nearby. So yeah, I wouldn't preclude something like that. It could be part of a permanent supportive housing project like the Hope might be another alternative for it, of someplace that will have, not a large project site, but with on-site services for people who really need them.
A lot of work ahead, yes.
But in your area, the Northeast Kingdom Mental Health, they have a place in St. J, one in Derby and Newport. And, if we're gonna do housing like that, it'd be nice to have it close to the facilities where these people can get some care if they need it.
That's the challenge. Other questions? Well, thank you. Friday afternoon, I realize this is really a combination, isn't it? Passover and Easter all at the same time.
It is, and I guess I just want to leave you again with, you've made an enormous difference. I know that we haven't solved problems, but thousands of Vermonters
Certainly.
that are doing better because of the investments you've made. And I thank you for the trust you placed in us. And
We'll be hearing more, and so thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Senator Sears,
How do you like
tuning
the
in.
job you like?
Oh, yes. Oh, hi, Senator Sears.
Hi, Senator Kitchell. I was reminded during the conversation about my first term on Senate Appropriations in 1996. And the way they solved the problem was they just said, any new program in the last 10 years should be eliminated, because if we didn't need it before then, we don't need it now. And they proceeded to cut that, all those programs. And it turned out they got a 4-3 vote out of the committee. There were 3 Democrats and 4 Republicans. I think their big mistake was Big Bird, and Gus may remember they cut Big Bird. But
I think Helen really.
Oh, that was the Big Bird vote.
it is one solution. We could go back to 2013.
Well,
I don't know. I think this program that we did 35 years ago still cranking out good stuff, so us should have been gone a long time ago. So we'd had to start over again and then over again. We'd be on the 4th anniversary of starting over.
Well, I'm just glad all the numbers that you provided on recovery homes, homes for the homeless, shelters, transitional, and the improvements for folks with disabilities and others is really quite an accomplishment. It's great.
thank you.
Thank you
I
all.
wish
Yes.
I could say the committee's done, but we have a bill here that we're going to take up before we adjourn for the week.
Madam Chair, do you have copies?
No, of the draft amendment.
I was hoping.
This is the amendment. And it's a strike ball.
Yeah, I just want to.
Of the strike ball. All right.
Not in a-
I just posted it like 30 seconds ago, so you might just need to refresh.
I think, while we're getting copies, maybe we can, so,
Reelected twice now to get home.
so committee, I'm gonna, suggest it, while we're having copies made, we at least get started on it. S39 is a bill that we took testimony on, and we did not act on it yet because we needed to have more conversation within the Senate. Our pro tem has done that, and this has to do with legislative compensation. I think as a result of those conversations, we are going to have before us an amendment, a strike-all amendment to the bill that would address what has been identified through those conversations as really the key areas to move on at this time. And so Jen Carby is here and can go through that strike-all amendment, but there were a variety of different reimbursements that were being proposed. Those are not going to be included in this bill. And then there's also, but what is really been determined as the most important, and that is healthcare coverage. That, in fact, if we move on that, can be offered within this biennium, within the legislative budget, as based on the estimated cost. And then a phased-in movement toward compensation that legislators would get in the next 2 bienniums. So we're not voting on any increase for those of us who are in office right now. That there would be, right now there's some compensation for the speaker and our pro tem because of the additional duties, and that that recalculation to maintain that current differential, to recognize the work associated with those positions will be maintained. And then the other, which is, we've had some conversation, and that is the volume of work that people are experiencing when we're not in session. And oftentimes that has to do with meetings, boards, other activities, certainly dealing with constituent issues, responding to email requests and so forth. And so it's a way of recognizing the amount of time that service is requiring. And this has been done after a lot of review. There was a Snelling report that basically said that to get people to run for office and can afford it is really difficult, and you either have to be able to you're retired, or your employer will, or you own your own business or whatever, so the limitations of the who can run is certainly not necessarily reflective of the Vermont population as a whole. So this is an attempt to recognize that we have lost a number of younger members of the legislature because they simply cannot afford to devote this much time at the compensation level. I got an email from former Senator Chris Pearson, who said, in retrospect, what a tremendous financial burden or penalty his family and he have experienced just from the time that he took to serve here. And we saw 2 senators last year retire, run again, and because they had families, younger families, and they couldn't make it work financially. So this bill is designed to make some progress on that front. It's not, some people said, are we going to move to full-time? I can't think of anything that would be more discouraging for most of us to want to be a full-time legislator. But nevertheless, those who have been like Senator Sears, Senator Starr, Senator Westman, who have been here a long time, and I'm only here since 2004, so it's only approaching 20 years. I have really observed the intensity and the volume of the work and the complexity of the work over that period of time. So with that, I'm going to go and ask Jen to go through the proposed strike all amendment that we would be voting out from this committee that would deal with the weekly pay while we're in session, and that 2-session process, the leadership compensation, and then the off-session compensation. And then I believe the balance of the bill would be struck. That those are the pieces that are moving forward. So I'm going to let you take it from here, and then we can ask any questions once Jen's reviewed the strike all with us.
Great, thank you. Jen Carvey, Legislative Counsel. So we are looking at as the chair said, a strike all amendment S39, which is an act relating to.
Jen, can you put that on the screen by any chance?
I can.
Because we don't have copies.
Yeah, the copy guy is doing them right now, so,
Yes, let me.
but I can do that too.
Can you do it?
I can put it on here.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I can
Thank you, Andrew.
join Zoom.
We're technically proficient in here. Well, at least Andrea is. I'm not. And we are. Great. Thank you.
All right, so this is S39, an act relating to compensation and benefits for members of the General Assembly. And as the chair said, the health benefits provision would stay in here. So this would make members eligible for the same plan that is offered to state employees. Some of the changes that are in here are really just cleanup changes, but there is language on the bottom of page 2. This is the same as what came out of Senate GovOps, but that says, for purposes of group hospital, surgical, medical expense insurance, that's the way the language is used in the statute. I guess this is a different piece, but this is, so for purposes of that, insurance for any group employee assistance program offered to state employees and any flexible spending account program offered to state employees for healthcare or dependent care expenses or both. The term employees includes members of the General Assembly. So this makes you eligible for your, whoever's here in January, eligible for health insurance, the Employee Assistance Program, and the FSA's Flexible Spending Account for the care of child care, which you put your own money into. It's just pre-tax. And then further down on page 3, members of the General Assembly shall be required to pay the same portion of the premium for the health insurance as is required of employees of the executive branch, which is also what your legislative staff.
Does the flexible spending account include what besides childcare?
Childcare and dependent care expenses. There's
So if it were a long-term care situation, would it include?
Elder care.
I believe it does. It's however the existing program is.
So theoretically, the flexible spending account would be available to people who had some home care issues.
I believe it is for.
To the extent it's
yes.
available to other state employees, I think. So I don't know.
Yes, so I believe it is dependent care expenses. I believe it is, and it's, as defined under federal law. So it uses those federal definitions.
Yeah, Andy.
And also the flexible spending for healthcare.
Healthcare, yes, I think I said child and dependent care, health and healthcare, yes. So there's two FSAs, two flexible spending accounts that state employees are eligible for, and legislators would be eligible for that as well. All right. So then if we go to, we go further down, we get to section 2. This is new. We're now in compensation and expenses. Section 2 is a new section. This is the beginning of that phased in approach. It's legislator compensation for the 25-26 biennial session. And so each of these will start out by saying, notwithstanding any provision of the regular legislator and then speaker and pro tem compensation statutes to the contrary. So notwithstanding any provision of the one for other legislators, 32 VSA 1052, members of the General Assembly other than the speaker and the pro tem are entitled to the following weekly salary amounts during the 25-26 biennial session. So now we're on the top of page 4. For 2025, a weekly salary of $1,000 plus an adjustment consistent with the compensation increase provided to other constitutional officers for fiscal year 2025. And that idea of the compensation increase for other constitutional officers is the way the legislative compensation is currently indexed. So it's just applying, it's picking a dollar amount, but applying whatever that indexing would have been for FY25 to the 2025 salary.
And we were told that this, the committee was trying to benchmark eventually is the average, is that right? The average weekly salary.
Yes, but it's based on the information that we have now. So the information we have now in 2023 is the average weekly salary for 2021, because that's the most recent year for which there's data available. And so Dan has attempted to kind of index that forward. And so right now we know what the compensation increases are for the current and next fiscal years, because we know it's in the pay, it was passed as part of the collective bargaining agreement. For exempt employees, which is what gets applied to the constitutional officers. And so this is attempting to index that forward, but by the time we get out to 25, 26, 27, it's not clear how that will specifically align with what the average statewide weekly wage is at that point in time. So yes to the extent we can, and trying to index that forward with our existing structure.
So basically, the index will be based on the bargaining agreement going forward.
Yes, but the bargaining agreement as it applies to the exempt employee, so it's the COLA plus the average step increase.
Right, so that'll go forward, but we're setting it on the average wage for 2022 or 2020.
We're setting it in 2023. We are taking the average wage from 2021, indexing it forward based on what we know of the increases from 22, 23, and 24.
Right, but we're not indexing the average wage. We're just saying that's the average wage. And then because the constitutional officers would get this index, that's how we're doing the 2026 increase of $100. Are you taking the 21 average and saying, we think the average in 2023 would be this? You know what I
We
mean?
are, so I could jump in if you have better recollection. I wish Dan was here to speak to the numbers.
Percentage between 21 to 23 is 10%, because that's what it's running, is about 10. And it running to go from 1,000 to 100 to 10%.
You know, Stephanie.
So what we're doing in here, so that the 25 and 26 are sort of phasing us into the 27 number, which was what was originally proposed for the rank and file numbers in the bill that came out of the GovOps committee. So it's sort of doing a phased implementation of that, but applying, because this is the average weekly wage thing now, with the current indexing based on the 22, 23, 24 constitutional officer increases.
You applied that to the whole statewide average weekly?
I'm not gonna get this right. I think these are good Dan questions.
I mean, in terms of the calculation
In
of the
terms of the
salary.
calculation of how we got from,
JFO produced these phase-in numbers.
yes, well, yes, I mean, I would say Dan Henry and I sort of, talked about how to get from where you are to the 27 number in a sort of equal increments kind of way. That's how you get the 1,000.
So the first salary upward adjustment would occur in 2025.
Yes.
So,
Based on the, well, maybe I can figure it out offline, because I think it's good to make sure, at least I'd like to make sure I understand how we got to that.
the methodology to get to the $1,000.
Dan should probably win it, or it's in it.
Okay, all right, so why don't we keep going and then he can explain the methodology.
And just for kind of comparison's sake, and you may already know this, but the current salary is 811. So I think Dan was able to figure what it would be in 24, because we already know what the increase will be for that. And then, which I think gets you a little over, or gets you closer to 900. And so it was roughly using those same differentials to plot it out to 2027.
Did you plot out what it would be 2027 with this bill and 2027 without it?
No, because we don't know what the increases will be in 25 and 26.
But if you take the 25 salary, the $1,230. No,
Yeah, 1230.
1230. And then you go to the next year, 26. That's pretty.
Well, that's the speaker pro tem, so we're still on the other members, it's the 1,000, 1,100, and then it gets up to,
So it's, yeah,
Okay,
just maintaining.
so what we have is for 20, if we just reading it,
Same percentage rise, but the same difference.
for 25, the
Yeah.
salary would be an even $1,000.
even 1,000 plus the, right, plus the, what I'm
Whatever
calling
that turns out
index.
to be.
Right.
And then in 26, it would be 11, which is because we're ratcheting it up piece by piece.
Right.
Then it would be, we're changing the base and then the adjustment. We're moving the base up, but it's over really a four-year period of time, 2 bienniums.
Yes, I mean, the last kind of jump beyond the index comes in 27, and then the just regular indexing starts in 28. So in 25, we have a set amount of 1,000 plus the index. In the index for FY 25. In 26, we have a flat amount of 1,100 plus an adjustment reflecting the 25 and 26 increases. And then you'll see when we get to the next section, we set it in statute with a new number for 27 plus the 3 years worth of indexes. And then starting in 28, it's just the annual index. So we stop kind of moving it forward. In subsection B, we are looking at the speaker and pro tem. And so similarly, there's a new weekly salary amount in 25. This would be 1230 plus the FY 25 index. In 2026, it would be 1530 plus the 2025 and 2026 indexes. And then the speaker and pro tem get not only the weekly pay during the session, but they also get an annual salary. And so this would increase those amounts for 25 and 26. For 2025, it would be 19,000 plus the FY 25 index. 2026, it would be 23,500 plus the 2025 and 2026 indexes.
Is that paid weekly or by pay?
That is paid by pay period every other week. And then I just put in a reference in subsection D saying those weekly salary amounts are the same ones that should be used everywhere in statute. We talk about determining legislator compensation based on their weekly pay. So that includes per diem, special session, and adjournment compensation. Then in section 3, we get to what would actually go in statute. So we start with the speaker and pro tem because they're in an earlier section of the statute. And so this would reset the compensation at $28,300 for the first year of the 2027 biennial session, plus an adjustment consistent with the compensation increases provided to other constitutional officers for fiscal years 2025 through 2027, and then beginning on January 1st, 28, and annually thereafter on January 1st. Just have that same index consistent with the increases for other constitutional officers. And then the salary being paid in biweekly installments is not new, it's just moved because it was sort of in the middle of the whole big paragraph. And then in addition to that annual compensation that the speaker and pro tem are entitled to receive, and this is where we reset for 2027, the weekly amount during the session to 1830. So we're at 1230, 1530, and now 1830 for the first year of the 27 session, plus the index for fiscal years 25 through 27. And then starting in 2028 and annually thereafter, we've got the index. And then what is now just a conforming change in the language around the allowance for or reimbursement of expenses for mileage, meals, and lodging.
Can I ask a question about the whole, which I probably should have asked when we got the bill presented, but so when the bill was presented here, so like when 20 years ago, we tried to set the compensation at the Vermont average wage. And then I heard the committee say, well, we got out of sync with that, just trying to do it by the increases that the state employees got. Or there's nothing in here that would prevent us from that happening again. We could go another 20 years and find out that we're out of whack with that.
Yes, but we changed the index a couple of years ago. So the index for most of the time until 2020 was just the COLA, not the COLA plus the average step. So it was a much lower increase that really exacerbated that split from the average statewide wage. So with the newer indexing amount being what the other constitutional officers get, hopefully it will keep closer. And obviously we can keep an eye on the average statewide wage or any other metric you want and make adjustments in statute over time.
Has the average wage ever gone down?
I don't know the answer.
Where?
Probably in the Depression.
Yeah, I mean, like, is that the only time? I just wondered if there was ever a year where the average Vermont wage
Went
went
down.
next.
I know.
No,
Just general.
you could have deflation, but you normally wages.
Always if you're in business for yourself.
Right, if you're a farmer.
Well, you get a reduction.
It's what I heard from Jen. We made some adjustments, so we didn't keep up during a period of time.
The way the statute had been written until just a couple of years ago, so you can actually see in the existing language, let's see, maybe you'll see it better in what we're about to come to. So if you go to page 7, exactly, you can see, and if you kind of read through the starting through some underlines, what has been the case is there was a weekly salary amount, and then it said on line 12, thereafter, provided that on January 1st, 2027, the weekly adjustment shall be, compensation shall be adjusted annually thereafter by the cost of living adjustment negotiated for state employees under the most recent collective bargaining agreement. And then it says, except that beginning on July 1st, 2021, which is when the new change was made, the weekly compensation is adjusted consistent with compensation increases provided to other constitutional officers. So for the period from 2007 until 2021, it was just the COLA piece of the COLA plus average step. And then starting in 2021, you've been getting the COLA plus average step. But
So
that's
without the average, so.
Without the average step, that's
Without
what
the
caused
average
it.
step, if, and this is not for you, this is joint fiscal. If the average step had been in place from the beginning, where would it be at?
Oh, Dan has that, and I think it's coming pretty close. I'll wait for him to come in, but I think he's done that math.
Yeah, it's just the question, if that had been there, would we have been in the same position that we're proposing, or we're really close?
So in essence, what we're doing is retroactively making that adjustment on those lesser amounts that were generated by not including average step component, which we did put back in, or we put in 2021, but between 2007 and 2021, we really were increasing that ground. We're losing ground because of the increase of the methodology to determine the salary, weekly salary increase.
all right. So then
Well, we didn't even know we were losing ground.
So then this section is, section 4 amends the compensation and expense reimbursement for members other than the speaker and pro tem. And it's separated out into session compensation. And so this would reset the amount for the 2027 session at $1,210 a week for the first year, plus an adjustment to index the FY25 through 27 amounts. And then beginning on January 1st, 2028, we have that annual indexing.
Why do we use the 589 for 2005?
That's just what it was set at. That was the amount that they put in
Existing
statute.
statute.
Right, that's existing law. And so we're striking that out and instead saying 1210 for the first year of the 2027 session.
So we're rebasing.
Because, I mean, not that it happens, but somebody could pick a copy of this up and they'd say, well, let's see, from 2005 to 2023, their salaries, it's double.
But the 589 is before, even between 20,
Today's number was in there.
well, the problem is that figure's in the exact statute right now.
Doesn't look like,
But I think you're right, Bobby. That's why people say you're doubling your salary. They just look at the 589 and the
But the
1,200.
589 isn't what we're getting.
2005,
Oh,
18
yeah,
years
no,
later.
but
I know.
for the average Joe that'll pick this bill up or something.
Average Joe is a number.
Well, I think then we need to have like I think we need a fact sheet
The average
that will,
troublemaker.
it will take the 589 and adjust it upward, even though the methodology was obviously not as great as it would have been with the COLA plus the average step, because the 589 is what it was and was served as the base back in, what was it, 2005?
So an option, if the committee would prefer, is that instead of it's kind of amending within the existing statute, we can strike what is currently in the statute, so at least you can see the indexing language that currently applies. So it might be clearer to somebody reading it that the current amount is not.
But as long as
589.
the 589 is there and it has to be removed because it's in statute.
It does. I can just strike through the whole subdivision 1 and put in a new subdivision 1 if you would rather the 589 have a bit more context with it.
Well, that might be
What do we get now?
800.
You get
811.
811.68.
But if that showed up, and then you went to 12, I mean, that's, but going, showing the 205, they'll rewrite over in their own days, they're getting, going from less than 600 now to over
And the
12.
other thing that's not, that also is limiting here is that between the 25 and then the first year for 27, it looks like quite an increase, but we're talking about an increase over that 3-year period of time.
Right.
So that's the other thing. If people just look at one figure comparing it, but it's not just 1 year increase, it's over that 3-year period of time. Maybe a fact sheet is a little easier.
So I was gonna say, I don't know if it matters how we do the statute change, but I think a fact sheet, at least for the floor presentation, to show what it is now, what we're changing to.
Those were the number sheet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Table, yeah.
so, so the current would be 811.
And then you could also show that same question from Senator Westman of what it would have been
What
had
would
we
have
done
been.
this starting in 2005.
What if we had the constitutional officer indexing?
The step had been in
And
all
the step,
along.
and we understand you calculated that.
So,
Yeah, to answer your Secretary of Fiscal, I do have, I went back, just using the Lieutenant Governor as a proxy because he or she is one of those constitutional officers. But, I think looking back, if you'd had the full COLA and step for this whole period of time, instead of being 811, you'd be something more like 870, 880. So it's a little bit higher, but
Not a lot of it.
yeah, and that's because there was a huge period of time where, mainly around the recession, where those salaries were frozen.
We stopped the step increase.
So, but that's the same for the constitutional officers as well. But then as far as the fact sheet, the only issue I want to raise is that we don't know what the pay act's going to be. And the pay act's going to be a piece of that for each of those years when the salaries transition up. So I can make a guess. I'm going to guess for the fiscal note, something like about a 3.25, which is about the average for the past 5 years for constitutional officers, but we don't know what those will be.
That 3.25 is just the COLA or?
That's the COLA and step.
Both.
Yeah, on average.
So there were questions about the relation, about how this 1210 number relates to the statewide average weekly wage, and how we got to this number, and I tried to explain that. I'm going to great job, so I'd love for you.
Yeah, I can explain that. So so the most recent data we have for the statewide average annual wage is 2021. So the average weekly wage was about 1066. And then what I did with that number is adjusted it by the 2022 Pay Act, or the Exempt Pay Act, 2023 Pay Act, and then what we know right now is 2024 Pay Act. And that's what got me to 1210.
Okay, so there weren't any projections of what the average wage would be.
It was just, okay.
Using all real data that we had.
Right, it's using the real data that we have and then kind of applying your existing construct of applying the exempt pay act amount. But that's why as we get further into the future, we potentially get further away from what the statewide average annual or statewide average weekly wage may be, because we just don't know. We're basing it on the best we can project.
Right.
It's good to say, I think, that the constitutional officers did have times where their pay was frozen, so that means legislative pay would be frozen. If we're using our compensation on their increase, like if there's some other downturn in the economy, we're not going to be getting it. We're going to be treated equally.
All right, so that was the member compensation during the session. Then there's an existing provision around special session compensation that says for each day of the special session, you get 1/5 of your average weekly compensation.
You're adjusted.
Yes, your average adjusted.
So that'd be like a detailed session.
Yep, veto session, special session,
Like we got a 3-day session this.
exactly. And then new for, and this bill would be adjournment compensation. You would also get an amount equal to 1/5 of, or whoever's in your seats, 1/5 of the annually adjusted weekly compensation rounded up for each week of the adjournment of the General Assembly. So it would be the equivalent of a day's worth of, or 1/5 of a week's worth of pay during the off session.
Not automatic.
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 It's entitled. It is not a,
So
it's not a
stipend.
claim. Yeah, it's a stipend.
But if you,
Vacation.
when you're off,
Well, you're still gonna need 200 days worth.
So is this different than the bill?
No, it's the
No,
same.
this-
no, this was in the bill. The question was raised, if you were adjourned and you're on an oversight crew. So you would get the adjournment compensation plus the per diem.
I thought what was the part that you had up to 8 hours you could put in for?
So there was language in what came out of
That's
Gov Ops that would
That's
be,
preparation for
yeah,
meetings.
preparation
That got
time.
deleted.
Okay,
That's
and that's,
not.
I was confused with this part.
But in the off session, if you had just one day of meetings, a few hours, because some come for 3 hours and call it a day. You wouldn't be able to get both, I would hope.
you would get your weeks, your adjournment pay for the week, and you would get your per diem for the day that you worked.
Because one would assume that you're not doing you'd have to be doing both that week, constituent services.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What?
Well, I mean, you melt the cow, but don't melt her really dry. I mean, if that's the only, what about the week or 2 weeks you take off and go on vacation?
Well, it's you're entitled to it, doesn't mean you have to take it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I thought it's, because I was like, oh boy, I don't know about that. I had reservations. And then I realized I take my iPad with me. I'm actually doing emails and work. And I was like in Lima, Peru, and I'm like sitting there doing, because the work, if you don't do it, it's so
It builds
overwhelming.
up.
You can't, you'd have
Well-
thousands of emails.
For me, it's one thing that we represent 20 odd thousand. A House member does 4.
Well, should we
I
Well-
represent 68,000.
I think the House members in my district meet with constituents a lot more than I do. And they all have a work
They do a huge
around constituent services. So, I mean, for me, it's more like, we were getting in the remote era, we were getting a stipend for being remote. And we were still getting paid if we did meetings. So it was this similar principle there.
But that's $75 that we got.
No, it was more than that. It was, what was it, 250?
Oh, I don't know, we got the 75 daily stipend.
Oh, no, I'm thinking of the remote, it was 250, wasn't it? We got
We did?
yeah, when we were all home, and we were all on Zoom.
right.
We got it, because people had a shortfall.
Right.
We did the 7, I thought it was just the 75.
And
But maybe,
$75 a
300.
day or something.
we might have something in a few minutes.
We have an amendment.
We have an amendment, a strike all to S39.
Right.
And I need to keep going because we need to get it up to you. I realize it's Good Friday and some people want to get home and have company or a holiday, so
I
Go ahead.
just say that, the compensation, how it comes in, I probably would have done it different, but thing that really, how many meetings do we all travel to all through the fall? And there's no reimbursement for any of your mileage or anything. And I personally think whatever ends up in the end in this process needs to be simple and straightforward. And I don't have to keep track of every month, but the amount of miles I put on my car for meetings all through the fall, and particularly the closer we get to the session, I find myself becoming resentful for all those meetings, that there's no recognition that we've done it.
Well, let's keep going, because, we would still be doing that mileage. We're getting the, but it would
No,
help
I-
offset just some of the expenses incurred to, do the travel. I remember Senator Sear saying years ago, he would go to every meeting, and he was the only person who wasn't paid to be there, as part of their job. So happens a lot. So let's keep going. The expenses
All
now.
right, so expenses, what's different here from existing law is that you would have members would have a choice going forward for meals and lodging about whether to receive an allowance, which is what you currently get, or reimbursement of actual expenses. And the difference here is if you do reimbursement of actual expenses, which you would have to substantiate, but they're eligible for non-taxable treatment under state and federal tax law.
Oh,
So
Is there a cap?
yes, the cap would be at the amount of the allowance, so you couldn't spend more on, thank you for that.
and so that's how you would deal with that tax issue then.
The dealing with the tax issue is by allowing, if members
To be
substantiate
reimbursed.
substantiate their actual expenses, it qualifies as an accountable
Does
plan.
that get rid of that 50-mile?
50-mile thing is federal law and it's currently suspended because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I think it potentially comes back in 2025. And I would have to defer to Abby for how that will work in practice.
Because that's all taxable.
So, Jen, on page 10,
It's not taxable. And I have a question if I could.
Oh, sure, Dick.
line 14,
This mileage reimbursement is not taxable. It's the other stuff.
Right, last year you made the switch to allow reimbursement rather than, or made it more specific about reimbursement, which allows it to be non-taxable.
Right. Currently, it is not, it is taxable. Does this mean that each member receives whether they travel the miles or not? So if I live in Bennington, I get 123 miles one way, and poor Andrew gets 14 miles.
You receive reimbursement in an amount equal to the actual mileage traveled for each day of the session on which you travel between Montpelier and your home. So that's what's in current statute, and we're not changing that here. It's just.
Okay, I thought we were into the compensation when we're not in session.
Oh,
No.
no. This is when we're in
Okay, my bad.
No miles.
But there's no
no expenses.
no expenses to go to local meetings or whatever. You just get that 1/5.
Oh, okay. All right.
So
Thank you
that's-
for clarifying that. I thought this was during the off session.
No. All right, can we keep going here?
Yes, so that's really what's going on pages 8, 9, and 10. It's either the allowance or the choice, choice of allowance or actual reimbursement up to the maximum up to the amount that you would get in an allowance, which is based on the amount determined by the Federal Office of Government-Wide Policy for Montpelier. So that's what those sections do. And then some of this is just some cleanup language around absence. You don't get paid if you weren't here, or you don't get your mileage, you don't get your reimbursements if you were not here.
Or you don't drive.
Well, this is specifically about absences. So yes, if you don't drive, then you wouldn't get the actual amounts that you
shouldn't be billing for.
Right, you should be billing for mileage if you're absent.
No, I'm saying if you carpool
Oh,
and you're
right.
not
Oh, yeah,
driving,
right,
you
well-
shouldn't be charging.
Yes,
Right.
there were some people that did that.
That used to be the big issue where people do.
Yeah.
Right, well, they were all phrased as allowances,
Yeah.
so, that was.
Like the free press.
Then there's so on page 11, in subsection C, what looks like it's getting struck through about members of the Joint Fiscal Committee getting paid. It's just that this is duplicative language of what already happens in Title II, so in 2 VSA Section 23. attending meetings, legislative meetings. When you are not in session, you get per diem and reimbursement of expenses. So we don't need a specific provision for the Joint Fiscal Committee because it operates the same for all members under Title II.
So I'm just looking at lodging and also meals. And there's the phrase that you provided for the night before.
Yep.
We don't have that now.
We don't believe your allowance provides for that, but it's
So
the
our allowance
maximum,
is 4 days for lodging right now.
but the maximum is still the amount of,
Okay, so you can't go above the 4 days.
well, it says the amount of the daily
Doesn't say
reimbursement
that.
shall not exceed the daily amount.
Okay.
We didn't really talk about it, so.
Yeah, I don't know what that means. If it means that you get an extra bit because you're coming in a day earlier.
Well, a lot of people come in Monday night.
Yes, I know,
And
but
so
you
it's-
can't.
But they don't stay Friday.
You can't take it.
But you don't stay Friday night, so it's only
No.
4 nights.
It's only 4. But this, I'm wondering what the implication is of saying, as well as lodging for the night preceding.
Right, because it's Monday night, Tuesday night.
Well,
Wednesday,
otherwise
Thursday.
it
You're
would
not gonna
just
stay Friday.
say, that you only get lodging for each day that the house in which the
Tuesday,
member
Wednesday,
served shall
Thursday,
stay,
Friday.
which would mean you'd only get Tuesday, you'd only be eligible for
Right,
Tuesday,
Tuesday,
Wednesday.
Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. When I put my expenses.
Well, you're
in,
counting it for 4. You could do
I'm
Monday,
doing
Tuesday,
4,
Wednesday.
but it's 4, but then this one says, as well as lodging for the night preceding.
Right, because it's not, because if somebody stays over Monday night and the house didn't meet on Monday, you otherwise would not be eligible to receive reimbursement for the Monday night.
Yes,
We-
but
they
you
stay
can get
Friday,
it
they
for
could make
Tuesday,
5
Wednesday,
days.
Thursday, Friday.
Who would
Potentially,
stay Friday? I guess they could.
Is she,
I thought instead of doing Monday, I did Friday. That's it.
we could say for not more than
quite
4.
frankly, if she stays Friday and she stays into the evening
Yeah,
and stays
could be a
over,
storm or something.
Wait,
you should get, if you work till 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and you did that, but I know you do.
We've been
Okay.
known to.
well, that's a question. I don't know what that means, that's all, just a question.
It'd be good to
Could be
clear.
nothing.
Because a lot of people that live far away come up
Yes.
the night before,
Yes, they do.
particularly in winter time.
Bennington,
They might stay Friday.
Rarely do they stay Friday.
But that's the question, could they get reimbursed if they?
right.
I think they probably could, under this scenario. But the only time I can envision anybody would do it is because of very late session and they had, a long
We've
commute.
sometime gone,
They
into
don't wanna
the
go
weekend.
home.
Yeah.
And if we stay in a week and you go into the weekend, should they not be reimbursed?
Although if you're in session all night, you don't need to be.
You don't need to sleep.
You're not allowed.
Bring your pill.
I remember a session, Bill Sorrell and I are walking around Montpelier at 4 a.m. We had not adjourned until like 8 on Saturday morning.
Ralph Wright used to like to have, see the sunrise.
Yeah. Well, it was a tactic.
It's a way to put the pressure.
So let's keep going.
All right,
It's
so-
3:00.
Yeah, so down toward the bottom of page 11, there is stipend for members-elect. Members-elect who are not an incumbent would receive a stipend in an amount equal to that same 1/5 of the annually adjusted weekly
And
compensation
that's when they come up for
for new
orientation.
member orientation, exactly.
Just for that.
Yes.
Yes,
And only if they show up.
Because we want them there.
right.
Oh, you even have death of a member?
That's existing law, it's just getting a.
It's okay.
Rich.
It's okay.
You're the big person.
Got out of here.
First one. You're-
No, I'm not planning on it.
Don't put it at the end of the session, put it at the beginning of the.
It's only for the pay
I want you to
period.
know, it says the estate shall be entitled.
Not the
Most people don't try to
Just for
avoid.
the pay period, just for that 2 weeks. It's
Oh, I
not
thought it
the
was-
rest of the
yeah.
session.
No,
I thought it was
I
the
understand.
whole-
Pay period.
Well,
Well, they
no,
do.
no, my point is, if you've done really good planning and you know you're gonna die sometime or other, you don't have an estate. And this says that has to
You
be.
do, it's not it doesn't have to be a probate estate, it just
Well-
has to be like your,
Your heirs.
whoever gets your
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it has to be
Nathaniel.
approved.
Nathaniel, we can't do it. Oh, my, blow through that.
You mean a taxable estate.
Uh,
You mean a
I'm in a
taxable-
taxable,
This is
I guess,
Appropriable estate.
I guess,
And
yeah.
you plan on that your spouse or whoever plans
You go
on
to my trust.
this money every week for X weeks.
I get it.
And you want to die, I mean, you ought to pay for that dead person or that dead person.
That's only for the in pay period, Bobby.
I know,
It's
it's just
2
for
weeks.
that
It's existing law.
day or two.
Let's keep
of the
going. We're
week.
not changing that.
Section 5 is a section on legislative leave from employment. Under current law, if somebody is looking for a leave of absence to serve in the legislature, it specifies that it's if you're leaving a full-time position. This would take out the full-time modifier, so it would be any position would be entitled to a temporary or partial leave of absence in order to serve. And it changes the when members have to provide notice to the employer that they intend to take legislative leave. Right now, under current law, it's within 10 days after filing the primary election nomination petition or taking other action to put your name on the primary or general election ballot. This would move that. So a lot of people, by the time they get elected, didn't know that this was an option. This would move that to 14 days after being elected, so 14 days after the election.
And it has to be in writing, because I know somebody that failed to do it in writing, and their employer said, oh, you didn't do it in writing. But they still allowed them, but they were like,
Yes, it does have to be in writing, which, you know, as an employer, I would want it in writing, but. All right, then we get to the section 6.
Oh my God, a working group.
Legislative
I thought you
session
meant-
group.
yeah, it works. Good thing.
Why don't we just have the?
So this is from the original.
Yes, this is from the original bill, with just a few modifications in here to recognize that there are some compensation and benefit adjustments made in the bill itself. So those are the changes from the bill as it came over from the GovOps. But it's having the working group to look at issues around legislative compensation and benefits, staffing, administrative support, and the length of the legislative session. And
Is that?
they would be authorized.
How many meetings?
That's what I'm looking for.
I'm waiting, I'm channeling Alice
There is
Mitchell.
a legislative service working.
8.
Who's
You're gonna be on it, Bobby.
It's gotta be, put together.
6 on it.
Yes, but not more than 8 meetings.
Oh,
6,
6 people.
6 people, 8
6
meetings?
people, 8 meetings.
So
6 people, 6 meetings. That's an Alice Nitka.
So that's her rule, that was the NITCA limit.
Never more than 6 meetings.
Normally not. Well,
That's too
yeah,
much.
we normally do 5.
Right.
You can have whatever you want. It's your amendment. If you
I know.
want it to be 6, you can make it 6.
Yeah, I think probably. Committees tend to take as much time as they're given. And, so I want them to be very focused.
Okay.
I want my money returned effectively.
What's your return on investment? All right,
They can work longer on a single day
then we
because they're
have,
salaried.
then
How's
we
that?
have the appropriation section.
Yeah, that's for the healthcare piece.
Yes, so because of the healthcare piece for
That's the estimate.
853,000.
How much is that?
853, but that's an estimate.
That's an estimate with a lot of assumptions based on take-up rate and planned years. Very hard
How
to.
many legislators do they think will
Well, Dan lied.
take it up?
I don't know. Dan can tell you when he comes back.
I don't know.
It's his best estimate. We don't know exactly how many will be.
So the question I have about, I'm going back to that flexible service, flexible spending account.
FSA.
And that is a separate account from the healthcare account.
That's an HSA.
Is it an
No,
HSA?
these are FSAs. We've got nothing to do with HSAs.
Okay, it's an FSA, is it pre-tax or post-tax?
It's pre-tax.
Pre-tax
Yes,
dollars.
it's your money, pre-tax, you know, your money from your pay, should you choose to put it in, and state
Max like
employees
$200.
are eligible for,
Per year.
it's higher than that.
What is the match? Is there?
There's no match,
there's no
it's all your money.
There should be something in there
$400
for
is
people
not a
who
lot.
have
I
excess
have-
medical expenses, who are not just looking for insurance. Because you know what, everybody
That's good.
thinks it
But
says
this is
young people.
paralleling what the state
Ah.
employees get.
Yeah,
So I think
okay.
that it's long, we're not gonna redefine it
No.
here, we just need to,
And we're not gonna give ourselves things that they don't get.
Yeah.
that they don't have.
This is just a question. So, and it's a practical question and I don't want to change it. So you're on Medicare and, this pays, how does they handle that now? The state pays the supplemental?
No, no,
Or
no,
you're
no,
on
you
the
go
full-
off the Medicare and if you're employed full-time, then you go into the state.
Exactly, so you can choose, if you're on Medicare, you can choose to either disenroll from Medicare Part B and take the state employees plan.
Imagine anybody doing that.
Or, well, it may depend on what somebody has for supplemental coverage and what the cost of their supplemental coverage
And
plus
whether
their
their
Part B
income is
premiums
such,
is.
they're being billed an extra premium
This
based
is
on that.
just for.
Yes, so
It's
This
a,
is just.
So the
for-
I mean,
FSA
some-
And does it provide the dental coverage?
I think
No, I mean, you still
Pick your
have the
plan.
ability to buy in at
Pick
full
your
cost, but
plan,
there's no
and then you
provision of
pay
dental
a
coverage.
percentage of that plan.
All right.
So the FSA maximums under the current plan are $3,050 for a healthcare FSA and $5,000 for dependent care FSA. These are the maximum annual elections.
Under the state,
According to-
for the state employees.
Yes, and I think they may be the same.
So it's fairly
maximums as federal.
substantial,
yeah.
It is, yeah.
and you hope you never need it.
Exactly.
So.
Well, I mean, some of these are things that you typically plan to or expect you will have expenses for, is why you put the pre-tax dollars in.
So did anybody figure out the cost per legislator?
Yes,
That's what the 850,000 is, and they
Yeah.
must have done some
That-
estimate.
They've done the estimates as well as for the salary increases, but they don't have to be budgeted because they're not kicking in until the next biennium. So the only impact would be for people that want and need the health insurance.
Well, I know
No.
that, but has anybody?
Yes, it's been done. And
So-
Dan has calculated it out, what the budgetary impact would be.
You
and-
know what it is?
That's the estimate right there.
850, no,
$853.
per
No.
individual.
Oh.
So we talked about individuals and how much pay they're gonna be getting.
So it's a blend.
So you're
Do we
asking what
know
the,
how much?
are you asking what the premium is?
No, what-
No.
what's the
He's asking
estimate per
what-
employee?
What is the value of the benefits that these people are getting that somebody who
Other
doesn't
people are
qualify
not.
for healthcare? I mean, I understand that.
No
Gee,
cafeteria
I
plan.
don't see it that way because everyone's eligible for it. Some people take it up because it makes sense to them and some people don't. But I don't think we need to.
It's like a
compensate
single
people.
worker versus a
Right,
family plan.
Right.
We're not saying.
We're not payment in lieu of, it's,
Yeah, no.
Right.
it's a benefit.
So the other, okay, so.
Which is frankly the same way it works for,
Yeah.
state employees too. If you
Exactly.
don't take
Maybe.
health benefit, you don't get something else.
So,
Should I bring up
wait a minute, Andy's had his hand up and then we'll go. So Andy, do you want to?
I was just gonna say that I like the amendment. I'm willing to move it. I just wanted to hear what the Government Operations Committee thought this could.
Well, we have a member here. I did speak with the chair about this, who I believe spoke with the presenter of the amendment. I was told that they were behind.
They would view it as a friendly amendment. You want to speak on behalf of the committee, Senator White?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have not taken a vote on this or a straw poll, so I can't speak to the committee, but after reviewing the amendment, I personally felt that it did stick to the spirit of what we were attempting to do, and I appreciate the work that you've done. But I'm happy to bring it back if that would be helpful for you. for
I
us
will
to-
say that I spoke to the chair
Yeah.
and she also told me
Yeah.
that.
That's good for me.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
so this isn't a surprise
No.
on that part. Senator Lyons.
So, no, I do want to ask a question regarding chair's compensation, because there is significantly more work to do as a chair than there is as a.
You're under the study
That's
group.
part of the study.
You're getting-
But no, what the thinking was there in terms of not considering that at this time. That's all.
We spoke about it and we felt that we wanted to remain with the compensation piece being tied to the average Vermont salary. So if we were to make a distinction between chairs and other General Assembly members, that would pull us away from that in either direction. So we did discuss that, and that's why we put it in the study. One of the challenges with this bill is we do a lot of work that is unpaid, even with the way the bill is designed. So it was hard to balance. A chair probably is doing significantly more hours, but a member could also just be doing significantly more
No,
hours.
it's different. There's a significant difference. So I understand that a lot of individual senators and House members work overdrive and they get involved in everything, but the responsibility of the chair is the responsibility of the chair, regardless of what others do. And it's similar to what the pro tem and the speaker do, only maybe slightly less, because we work across the entire state. And I just want that to be on the record. I don't think it's appropriate to say that a chair does just what any other committee member does when they're working overdrive, because it isn't true.
Well, and I
So when
think
you
that,
become a chair, you'll
and
understand,
I think the bill honors that by putting that specifically into the working group
maybe.
to look
I
at
think
that.
there's a disagreement.
And, you
I
know,
don't-
and then you get into the scope of responsibility and the complexity and, you know, the extent to which different committees have broader,
that was
more
the-
narrow, so.
Appropriations chair
That's why I
should
guess
make
it's
more.
under study, but you're on record, Senator
I don't
Lyons.
like it.
Well, there's
I know
also,
what it's like to not be a chair and to be a chair.
there's
and
also
you're
the
just-
other body where they.
I agree with Senator Lyons.
There he is.
And, and I think, I don't think what troubles me sometimes is there are members who do little, if anything. And we, as chairs and other members of our committees, work double. In the Senate, we have 2 committees. And that's not recognized anywhere in this. I agree with Senator Lyons.
Well, and, you know, this is not, I don't think that the GovOps committee thought they were making the final statement on compensation. Certainly this.
That's why
amendment-
they created the work group.
Right, so, you know, there's a long road for this to travel, plus, you know, we're updating, but we're not, again, doing.
Is that Allison? Yes. Sounds like she's in difficulties.
Oh, she's sneezing?
Yeah.
Oh.
Sorry.
In other words, this amendment and the bill itself are trying to do the core things, and we're moving those core things, but it's not gonna speak to everybody's range of irritations about what.
But that's in a range of irritation. I'm also thinking about the development of the bill, it's a committee bill. And a lot of the folks, with no disrespect, are very new to the Senate and to the legislature. I do like what's in here.
It's just you'd like to have more in it.
A couple more.
Yeah.
So Senator Westman has
I would just say that
got a burst of gut
when
here.
you go over to the House, I think there are people that are chairs that will agree with you, and they will never bring it up in the House that the Senate serves on 2 committees, that our districts are bigger, that we have more correspondence.
Our constituent base.
And they will never say anything about the question of a constituent base being larger unless we put that in the study committee from the Senate, from the Senate's point of view.
I think anything where we attempt to.
Differentiate between the 2 bodies is a non-starter.
Can't say that.
When you don't want to even study. God, that's really losing when you don't want to even study. We study everything.
I don't think it's worth studying because they would argue that they do one committee, but they do it twice as hard as we do.
All
Or they do more intensive constituent work.
So, you know, it's
I'm
gonna be a
going to
wash.
suggest we come back to the strike all amendment. And we have a motion, I believe, from Senator Berger. Did
I
you
am
say?
willing to move it.
The strike all
I will
amendment
move. the strike.
with the one change, we're gonna reduce to 6 meetings.
Got that, so
And
the draft.
do I have a second to our clerk is,
I'm happy to
He's
second it.
he's
if I-
awoken from his reverie and he's ready to clerk.
And the clerks work hard.
Oh, yeah, the clerk's.
Clerk day, where's the clerk day?
Oh, he's gonna get his reward for the chicken salad sandwich. So I'm gonna.
Who, me?
Yeah.
I want meatloaf.
So I'm going to ask if there are any further comments, because we have, or questions, because we have a motion on the floor, which has been seconded, to move the strike all favorably. We're just going to change the number of meetings from 8 to 6.
So is this a motion to amend the bill?
No, we will,
That's just the scrivener's
no.
error.
Well, let's not call it the error, no. I have made the adjustment, so I think you could just move draft 2.1.
Yes, which will reflect that.
You didn't put yours.
And so we have a motion to approve draft 2.1, which is a
And
strike all
seconded
amendment.
by
And
Ruth.
yes, one.
Okay, Bruce,
Yes.
Ryan,
Yes.
Kirsten,
Yes.
Sears. Did Sears vote?
Yes, yes.
Sears? Senator Sears?
I gotta unmute, yes, yes, with the right to vote no when we get to the floor.
Senator Starr?
I'll vote to get it out of committee, but I'll be a no on the floor.
Westminster, yes. Kitchen?
Yes.
Okay. And next to the.
Who's the reporter?
You
are.
Okay.
Seven.
Seven.
All right, and the reporter is Senator Brewer. Maybe you ought to be the one interviewed by the reporter.
No, I think it should be. Is there a reporter out?
Yeah, there's somebody there. Yeah, it said we knew we were taking it up and was not available after.
I'm not doing it recording here either. I did it yesterday. I don't know what trouble I got myself in. Was I?
I saw it.
How was it?
Have you made yours?
Never changed. It said to try.
Are you done?
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so it's,
It's gonna be on Wednesday. Get ready, I'm gonna quote the Constitution, Prince. Reasonable compensation.
Ameren did too.
Yeah,
those
let
six.
Jackson show it.
I'll talk to Ameren.
I have-
8,000.
I think we have finished our work, just,
Well, I guess it would vary.
$4,700.
so I'm gonna,
Almost $100 a week.
so I would like to say that we have officially finished